the factory that can make millions of cigarettes and still lose money. So you want to own a cigarette factory. Imagine spending $100 million building a modern manufacturing plant capable of producing hundreds of millions of cigarettes every month. The machines run almost continuously. The tobacco moves through automated processing lines. Millions of cigarettes leave the factory. And yet, after taxes, distribution, compliance, marketing, labor, packaging, and the cost of keeping the factory running, the owner can discover that producing millions of cigarettes does not automatically mean producing millions in profit. At first, the economics look almost impossible to lose. People buy cigarettes every day. The product is small. It is standardized. The manufacturing process is highly automated. And once the factory is operating at scale, the cost of producing another pack can become surprisingly low. But cigarettes have a problem that most factories do not. The factory is not simply selling a manufactured product. It is operating inside one of the most heavily regulated consumer industries in the world. In the United States, a tobacco manufacturer must register its establishment with the FDA, list its tobacco products, comply with manufacturing requirements, and follow rules covering products, labeling, reporting, and distribution. New tobacco products can also require FDA authorization before being marketed. So the real question is not, how cheaply can you make a cigarette? It is, how much money remains after the factory has made it, packaged it, taxed it, transported it, and legally brought it to the customer? To answer that, we need to build the economics of a hypothetical cigarette factory from the ground up. Which factory are you buying? A cigarette factory is not just a warehouse filled with cigarette-making machines. The operation can include tobacco receiving and storage, conditioning, cutting and blending, cigarette-making equipment, filters, packaging, quality control, utilities, warehouses, laboratories, security, maintenance, and logistics. And the machines are fast. Industrial cigarette-making equipment can operate at extremely high production rates. Modern factory demonstrations show production lines capable of producing thousands of cigarettes per minute, depending on the equipment and configuration. But speed is not the same thing as profitability. A machine that can produce thousands of cigarettes every minute is only valuable if those cigarettes can actually be sold. The best cigarette factory is not the factory with the fastest machines. It is the factory that can keep those machines productive while maintaining quality, controlling waste, meeting regulations, and selling enough product to spread its fixed costs. For our model, imagine a modern factory requiring roughly $100 million in total investment. That includes the building, production equipment, packaging systems, utilities, warehouses, laboratories, quality systems, installation, and startup costs. The exact investment would vary enormously by country, factory size, automation level, and regulatory environment. But the structure of the economics remains the same. You pay heavily before the first cigarette is sold. Then you spend continuously to keep the factory operating. And finally, you discover that the largest number on the income statement may not be manufacturing cost at all. It may be taxes. The first $100 million. The first invoice is the factory itself. Imagine $100 million invested in the plant. Perhaps $65 million goes into machinery and production systems. Another $15 million goes into buildings, utilities, storage, and infrastructure. $10 million goes into installation, engineering, laboratories, and commissioning. And another $10 million becomes working capital, startup inventory, compliance, and other initial requirements. The factory is now ready, but it has not sold a single cigarette. And the owner has already tied up $100 million. That creates the first economic problem. Capital has a cost. Even if the factory is completely debt-free, that money could have been invested somewhere else. If the owner expects an 8% economic return on the capital tied up in the factory, $100 million represents an $8 million annual opportunity cost. That cost does not appear on the factory's electricity bill, but economically it is still real. A factory can look profitable because the owner only counts cash expenses. A serious owner also asks what return the $100 million could have generated somewhere else. The factory that never sleeps. Now the factory starts operating. The first costs are fixed. Employees have to be paid. Security has to remain active. The building has to be maintained. Machines require technicians. Laboratories need staff. Insurance continues. Software, compliance systems, accounting, quality control, and administration continue whether the factory produces 10 million cigarettes or 100 million. Imagine annual fixed operating costs of approximately $18 million. That could include labor and benefits, maintenance staff, management, security, insurance, utilities that remain active regardless of output, quality control, laboratories, compliance, administration, IT systems, and basic facility maintenance. The factory could shut down for a month. The payroll would still exist. The insurance bill would still arrive. The building would still need protection. And the machinery would still be sitting there depreciating. This is why utilization becomes critical. A factory is not expensive because it can produce. It is expensive because it has to be ready to produce. The cost of a single cigarette. Now we move from fixed costs to production. Tobacco is the obvious raw material, but a cigarette also requires paper, filters, adhesives, packaging materials, printing, energy, machine maintenance, quality control, and labor associated with production. For our illustrative model, assume the manufacturing and packaging cost before excise taxes, distribution, and major selling expenses averages about 4 cents per cigarette. That means 20 cigarettes cost roughly 80 cents to manufacture and package. At first, that sounds incredibly cheap, but the factory cannot sell cigarettes for 4 cents each. The retail price contains everything that happens after manufacturing. And this is where the economics become strange. A cigarette may cost only a fraction of its retail price to physically manufacture, but the government can take a significant share of the final price through tobacco taxes. The distributor takes a margin. The retailer takes a margin. The manufacturer has selling and administrative costs, and the manufacturer still has to recover the enormous capital investment. The cigarette is cheap to manufacture. The business surrounding the cigarette is not. The tax problem. This is where cigarette economics become fundamentally different from ordinary manufacturing. Taxes are not simply another factory expense. They are built into the economics of the entire product. In the United States, cigarettes are subject to federal excise taxes, while states and local jurisdictions can impose additional tobacco taxes. That means the manufacturer is not operating in a simple relationship between factory cost and retail price. The price consumers see can contain layers of taxation and distribution margins before the manufacturer finally receives its share. And higher cigarette prices can change consumer behavior. Some smokers reduce consumption. Some switch brands. Some seek cheaper products. Some turn toward other nicotine products, and some purchases can move into illicit channels. So the factory has to balance two opposing forces. Higher prices can increase revenue per pack, but higher prices can also reduce the number of packs sold. That makes pricing one of the most important economic decisions in the business. The billion cigarette question. Now imagine the factory produces 1 billion cigarettes per year. At 4 cents of manufacturing and packaging cost per cigarette, production cost would be approximately $40 million. Add the $18 million fixed operating cost. The factory now has roughly $58 million in manufacturing-related annual cost. But that still does not mean the factory makes money. Because the cigarettes have to reach consumers, they need distribution, warehousing, sales operations, brand management, compliance, insurance, trade spending, and in many markets, substantial excise taxes. Imagine the manufacturer ultimately realizes an average net revenue of 10 cents per cigarette after trade discounts and distribution effects. At 1 billion cigarettes, that produces $100 million of manufacturer revenue. Subtract $40 million of production and packaging costs. Subtract $18 million of fixed factory costs. Then subtract another $20 million for corporate overhead, distribution support, sales, compliance, and other operating expenses. The factory generates approximately $22 million of operating profit before financing, taxes, and capital charges. That sounds excellent, until we remember the $100 million investment. At $22 million of operating profit, the factory appears capable of recovering its initial investment quickly. But this is where the model becomes fragile, because that $22 million assumes the factory actually sells 1 billion cigarettes. What happens if sales fall? The 50% utilization shock. Suppose demand falls by half. The factory now sells only 500 million cigarettes. Production costs fall because less tobacco and packaging are required. But fixed costs do not fall by half. The building still exists. Managers still need salaries. Security remains. Insurance remains. The equipment still needs maintenance. Compliance remains. And the factory still needs enough technical staff to operate safely. Assume variable production cost falls from $40 million to $20 million. Fixed factory cost remains around $18 million. Corporate, distribution, and other expenses might fall somewhat, but not proportionally. Now the economics become dramatically weaker. Revenue falls from approximately $100 million to $50 million, but the factory may still carry tens of millions of dollars in annual operating expenses. The margin that looked enormous at full utilization starts disappearing. This is the manufacturing trap. Cut production by 50% and you do not cut the factory's cost by 50%. You simply spread the same building, machines, managers, and compliance structure across fewer cigarettes. That is why factory utilization can matter more than machine speed. A slower factory with strong demand can outperform a faster factory with empty production lines. The machine depreciation problem. There is another cost hiding inside the factory. The machines are not immortal. High-speed production equipment experiences wear. Bearings wear. Cutting systems wear. Packaging equipment requires maintenance. Electronic controls become obsolete. Software changes. Production technology improves. And eventually, major equipment needs replacement. Imagine the factory contains $65 million worth of production equipment. If the economically useful life averages 10 years, that represents roughly $6.5 million of annual depreciation before considering the exact accounting treatment or residual value. The owner may not write a $6.5 million check every year, but the economic value of the equipment is being consumed, and if the owner ignores that cost, the factory can look more profitable than it actually is. A factory that makes cash today can still be destroying capital. If the machines are aging faster than the business is replacing them, the profit is partly an illusion. The inventory trap. Cigarette manufacturing also requires inventory. Tobacco, filters, paper, packaging, labels, cartons, finished cigarettes, and sometimes large amounts of inventory must be positioned ahead of demand. That ties up working capital. Imagine the factory needs $15 million in inventory and operating working capital. That money earns nothing while sitting inside warehouses. If demand suddenly changes, some inventory may move slowly. If regulations change packaging requirements, old packaging can become difficult or impossible to use. If a product is discontinued, the factory can be left holding inventory that is worth far less than expected. The factory therefore has another hidden cost: inventory risk. The regulatory bill. Then comes regulation. This is not an industry where a manufacturer can simply invent a product, put it into a box, and start selling it. In the United States, domestic tobacco manufacturers must register their establishments with the FDA and list their tobacco products. The FDA also conducts inspections and enforces tobacco regulations. New tobacco products can require pre-market authorization before they can legally enter interstate commerce. That means a new cigarette brand is not simply a marketing decision. It can become a regulatory project: research, documentation, testing, product submissions, record keeping, labeling requirements, ingredient information, manufacturing controls, and ongoing compliance. In many industries, innovation is limited mainly by engineering and demand. In tobacco, innovation can also be limited by regulation. That makes the factory less flexible than it first appears. What happens when the market changes? Now imagine cigarette consumption continues declining in a mature market. The factory still has its machines, but the market is getting smaller. This creates a dangerous situation. The owner has three choices: reduce production, find export markets, or diversify into other products where legally and commercially feasible. But none of these choices is free. Export markets introduce new regulations. New products require development and potentially regulatory authorization. Reducing production increases the cost per cigarette because fixed costs are spread across fewer units. This is why a factory can become less valuable even while its machines remain perfectly functional. The problem is not the machinery. The problem is demand, the maintenance shock. Now imagine one of the factory's major production lines fails. The repair costs $2 million. The machine is unavailable for 6 weeks. The owner loses production. Employees remain. The building remains. Some overhead remains, but the factory cannot produce at full capacity. If customers cannot wait, the company may need to manufacture the product elsewhere, or lose shelf space, or delay deliveries. The cost is therefore not simply the $2 million repair. It is the repair, lost production, lost sales, potential customer disruption, emergency logistics, and the opportunity cost of an idle production line. Industrial maintenance creates a triple cost. You pay to fix the machine. You lose the output while it is broken. And you still pay for the factory while it sits there. Can a cigarette factory be a great business? Yes, but the economics are very different from what the factory floor suggests. A successful factory needs high utilization, reliable equipment, efficient procurement, strict quality control, strong distribution, a profitable brand portfolio, regulatory compliance, working capital discipline, and enough scale to spread fixed costs. The owner is not really buying a building full of machines. They are buying a system, and every part of that system has to work. The ownership traps. The first trap is believing manufacturing cost equals product cost. It does not. The second is ignoring taxes and distribution. The third is assuming that a fast production line automatically creates profit. It does not. The fourth is building too much capacity before proving demand. The fifth is ignoring depreciation. The sixth is underestimating working capital. The seventh is assuming a successful brand can be created simply by manufacturing efficiently. The eighth is forgetting that regulation can limit what products can be introduced and how they can be marketed. The ninth is running the factory at low utilization while carrying the cost of a full-scale facility. The 10th is assuming cigarette demand will remain constant forever. And the final trap is believing that owning the factory means owning the market. It does not. The factory controls production. The customer controls demand. The factory verdict. So what separates a profitable cigarette factory from a very expensive building filled with machines? Scale, utilization, distribution, capital discipline, and demand. A strong owner begins with the market. How many cigarettes can actually be sold? At what net price? Through which distribution channels? Under what regulatory structure? And how much production capacity is actually necessary? Then, they build the factory around those answers, not the other way around. They calculate manufacturing cost per cigarette. They calculate fixed cost per cigarette. They include depreciation. They model taxes. They calculate working capital requirements. They stress test demand. They reserve for equipment replacement. And they ask the most uncomfortable question. What happens if sales fall by 50%? Because the factory does not disappear when demand disappears. The machines remain. The building remains. The employees remain, the compliance obligations remain, the debt remains, and the owner is still paying for a factory designed to produce millions of cigarettes that nobody is buying. The real economics. The cigarette itself may be incredibly cheap to manufacture. That is what makes the business look so attractive. But the economics are hidden in everything around it. The tobacco must be sourced, the product must be processed, the machines must be maintained, the factory must be staffed, the cigarettes must be packaged, the products must comply with regulation, taxes must be paid, inventory must be financed, the product must reach retailers, and millions of units must be sold consistently enough to justify the factory's enormous fixed cost. That is why cigarette manufacturing is fundamentally a scale business. At high utilization, the factory can spread its fixed costs across enormous production volumes. The most dangerous cigarette factory is not the one that costs too much to build. It is the one that was built for a market that no longer exists. The machines create cigarettes, the factory creates capacity, the brand creates demand, the distribution network creates access, but utilization creates the economics. So is owning a cigarette factory a license to print money? Not exactly. It is a massive industrial bet on demand, regulation, scale, and capital efficiency. If all four work together, the factory can turn a product that costs only a few cents to manufacture into a business generating substantial revenue. If demand falls, regulation changes, equipment fails, or the factory operates below capacity, the same machines can become an extremely expensive reminder of one basic rule in manufacturing. Capacity only creates value when someone needs what you can produce.